Yo ho ho! So this evening I'd like to talk to you about the best books that I read in 2018 and the worst. So I have four 4-star books, one 5-star book, and one book that I thought I rated 1 star, but apparently I rated it 2 stars on Goodreads. So I suppose I'll make up my mind about it at the end of the video when I get to it. So let's get started. The first 4-star book of the year is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This book completely shattered my expectations of it. I didn't really even know what to expect. I was under the impression that this was just a love story, that it was some bit of soppy, romanticized classic, and little did I know that it was just a story about like a lost love and revenge, and mostly revenge and pettiness and more revenge, and safe to say I loved it. So yeah, my first tip is, if you're going to be reading this, you should look up the characters on Wikipedia, because it is a little bit confusing, because there's a few similar names and it's just a bit It did take some time to wrap my head around this novel. I was really confused by the first narrator, but luckily when the second narrator, Nellie, kicks in, she explains everything perfectly, and you realise like, oh, this is a really reliable narrator, like this is going to be grand, she's going to guide me on through this tumultuous story that this is, and everything will be fine. I thought some of the characters were quite outrageous, especially Linton Heathcliff, because he gave Robin Aaron a run for his money. He gave me some like proper laugh out loud moments, because he was just such a little pathetic little turd. It's a sad story, but like interesting. It kind of reads kind of like this might sound bad, it's kind of like a soap opera. It's very dramatic and stuff. I'd certainly recommend it, especially if you're like me and you were always just putting it off. Like, read it. It's not what you're going to expect. So yes, that's my first 4-star book of the year. Next is SlaughterhouseFive by Kurt Vonnegut. This was overall my most enjoyable reading experience of 2018. I read it when I was on a trip up to Belfast with my boyfriend Rob, and I just had time in the morning for myself to sit down and read, and it was glorious to not be stressed out for once, and to actually read something and not have to go back and reread paragraphs and pages because you zoned out, because you started panicking. It was just nice, and I kind of romanticized that time in my head, because I was just like, ooh, I'm not going to have that for a really long time again. So you probably all know what this is about, but it follows Billy Pilgrim, who's the main sort of character in this, and he is an American soldier who's honorably discharged from the war, who then goes on to suffer from really bad PTSD, to be expected. But then later on in his life, he claims to have been abducted by aliens, and upon his return to Earth, he can travel through time. So naturally, I fucking loved it. This is another book that completely shattered my expectations of it, and it really kind of raised the bar, and I'm so glad to have finally read it, because I really enjoyed Kurt Vonnegut's writing and his writing style, and I really would like to read some more of his books in the future, because I know this isn't his most popular, but I know he's got others out there that are just as good. So yeah, this is my second 4-star book of the year. Next is Junkie by William S. Burroughs. This is what I look for when it's a story about heroin. So this is a semi-autobiographical novel of William S. Burroughs' experience in the 1950s as being a heroin addict and a drug dealer. And I loved it. Like, he is unbelievably brutally honest, and I think that's what you would want in an account such as this. You don't want people skimming over the really nasty, gritty bits. You want someone who puts it all out there, and I really respected that. I found it to be very straightforward to read, which also helped, but he painted his world very, very clearly, especially the characters that go in and out of the story. You get a really good sense of them. And I think that's really important when painting your world, not that you're just living in like a dingy little flat. I felt like I was in the room watching them, and I was just completely immersed into it. So I don't know if that's like other people's experience, but it was mine, and I really enjoyed that. But it's one that I definitely recommend if you're into reading about the subculture of drug use, especially like in the 1950s. I think that's quite an interesting time for it to have happened. The way William S. Burroughs just describes not only that, but like his lifestyle, it's just, there's certain moments in it that I found to be quite beautiful, and like that might sound strange when you're talking about a book that's, on drug addiction, but there's these just little hints of light that like flicker in and out. Overall, I'd certainly recommend this if you're into reading about like the subculture of drug use and you're interested in all that kind of thing. It's my third 4-star book of 2018. The next book is The Room by Hubert Selby Jr. Now, I didn't know if I wanted to include this on the list, but I did give it 4 stars. But I had such a difficult time reading it because the content is so graphic and it really affected me in a negative way. There was times where I just didn't want to pick the book up because it was so intensively depressing. But I think, it should be included on this because it is a really great novel, and it's certainly one worth shining the spotlight on. So I'm not going to get too much into depth with this one because I'd like to post a standalone review of it. But basically, we have a narrator. We don't know who he is. He remains unknown throughout the entire story. I kind of speculate that I know who he is, but I won't get into that because that's kind of spoilery. He is sitting in a prison cell and he's recounting his life. It starts out with like his early memories, and then as we go on, it gets more sort of intense and jagged, and you don't know what is true and what is not true. And that's a huge part of this book because he claims that he's been falsely imprisoned, but realistically we don't know if that's true or not. And the crime that he's committed is completely and utterly just jaw-dropping. It is a really graphic rape, which is very graphically described. There's also horrible accounts of animal abuse in it. Again, it's one of those things where we don't know if it's real or not. Is he just imagining this or not? But it has to be one of the most brutal books that I've ever read, because normally nothing really affects me to the point that this affected me, and I was really surprised by that. But I've read Hubert Selby Jr. before. I read Requiem for a Dream. He has a really unique writing style. In this, it jumps from first person to third person quite a bit, and it's as if the character is interrupting himself. It's very smartly done, I think, and you'll understand it if you read it. This is a book that really hasn't settled with me yet, and I think it's going to take some time for me to recover from it, but I felt like it would be an injustice not to include it on the list for this year. So this is my fourth 4-star book of the year. Now on to my only 5-star book of 2018. It is of course 1984 by George Orwell. Yes, I can hear your eyes rolling in your head right now, but 2018 was the first year that I'd ever read this, and it was an eye-opening experience. So obviously I knew a lot about this because of all the pop culture references to it throughout everything ever since it was published. But I didn't know the core story of it, which I was amazed by, because for me it kind of came out of nowhere. I wasn't something that I was expecting to happen within it as I started reading it. It also wasn't something that once I started reading it, it wasn't something that I expected to enjoy, but I found it very, very interesting. So it's the story of Winston Smith, who is a member. He's like a low-ranking worker of the party, which is basically the government. Great Britain has become part of this super state called Oceania, and basically everything's gone to hell. There's government surveillance. The way people talk to each other, they're just talking in propaganda a lot of the time. Children are encouraged to rat on their parents if they hear their parents bashing the party or Big Brother. Big Brother is this thing that Winston isn't even sure even exists, but everyone talks about it. Like, now having read it, now that I get all the references about it that I've heard throughout my life, I really appreciate it. Like, it was one of those kind of things that it's filled in a lot of the blank space that I had around it. I find George Orwell's writing to be very easy to read. Like, if you're someone who has been like a bit put off by reading this because like, oh, it's a classic, you definitely shouldn't be put off by it. It is very kind of, again, straightforward to read. I knew I'd like it, but I figured it was going to be like a 3-star book. I thought it was going to be the most overhyped dribble ever, and that I actually wasn't really going to like it in the end. But again, it just went the other way, and it ended up really, really impressing me, and I'd certainly recommend it to those of you like me who hadn't read it yet. Give it a go and you might like it. So this is my only 5-star book of 2018. And now finally, the only 1-star book that I read in 2018, and it's probably going to be a little bit surprising because it was surprising to me. I was expecting to love this novel, and Oh, the first, it was the first book that I read in 2018, and it really, I think it kicked off my year because I was sitting around for so long. I didn't want to read it when I started reading it. I realistically should have DNF'd it, but I was like, no, it will turn around. It's gonna turn around. It will be fine. It is The Shining by Stephen King. Okay, so as usual, I had the same problem that I always have with Stephen King's novels. I found that a lot of it could have been edited down. But where this book actually lost me is when the hedges in and around the Overlook came to life and started attacking people. I was just like, oh no, we have just launched off the port of madness, but in a bad way. Like, it is a character study, it is like about character development, really, at the core. It's definitely a slow burn of a novel. You know that Jack is slowly but surely being driven demented by what he's seeing in the Overlook. But it's just, maybe, I've only seen half the film, but I feel like that actually spoiled me a lot. I think because I was waiting for certain moments that happened in the film to happen in this, and they don't actually happen. The film is a different entity of its own. I think the problem with this is that I had really high expectations. I had so many people over the years tell me to read it and tell me that I was going to love it. If I'm going to be brutally honest, I feel like this book was lost on me. I think I missed it. Like, I kind of missed the boat with it. But at the end of the day, there's plenty of other Stephen King books that I've read and enjoyed. This happened just to be a bump in the road, I think. It's not going to put me off reading his work in the future, but it was just overall very disappointing, and I'm disappointed in myself for not even being able to enjoy it. So like, I'm prepared for the backlash of comments that I might get. I wouldn't even be able to kind of recommend this. I just found it so tedious and drawn out, and I was just waiting and waiting for something to happen, and as usual, it doesn't start getting exciting until the last like 50 pages or so, and you've got that much to go through before you hit it. It didn't even seem worthwhile to me. I did like seeing like the other side of the characters, and to see more kind of fleshed out characters, but I think that was like the only thing really. So yeah, 1 star to The Shining. So that has been my best and worst books of 2018. Let me know the best and worst books that you read. Let me know if you've read any of these, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.